Okay, we're going to try that again. How are you today? Woo! Nice. I will start by saying I'm recovering from a cold, and so I sound a little bad. I apologize in advance.
Good morning. This was my first big success. I didn't trip walking onto the stage. Oh, this is amazing to see so many people here. This is my first time at VARC and was not sure what to expect in this room, and it's so deeply, deeply inspiring to see so many committed advocates here. So just a huge thank you before we get started. So let's start with talking about some of the challenges in the movement. And I know you've been looking into this recently. And why don't you, Lizi, start out by talking about what you see as some of the biggest challenges in facing the movement today?
Great, thank you. I will say we're going to start big and macro, and a little. We're going to start on the challenges so we can end on the opportunities and a bit of hope. So stay with us for the next few minutes. I've taken this invitation to this keynote quite seriously, so I've gone and interviewed and spoken to about 20 leaders in the sector just to understand what they see as the challenges, the opportunities, and asking everyone what gives them hope, so I'm going to try and weave a few of those in. The biggest challenge that sort of everyone spoke about slightly different things, but people really mentioned that it feels in the current environment like things are getting harder. So what was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, felt a little easier for them if people have been in the sector for a while. The synthesis on some of that for me is really the environment that we are operating. So I think my bio mentioned I worked at Blue State. Blue State work with a whole range of social movements. So human rights, animal rights where we can, climate action, international aid, global health and development. And everyone is feeling the same way. Everyone feels like the environment is making everything harder. And the big picture question for me would be actually if governments and members of the public are in a state of essentially a scarcity mindset. People are feeling they don't have enough money, they don't have enough time, they don't have enough compassion to go around, people are exhausted. That is affecting absolutely everybody. And that feeling of everything is a bit too much basically means that people don't have headspace or time or money to engage in new causes and new initiatives and new solutions. And so that's the kind of macro challenge that we have. And for me, the main consequence of that is what we're seeing because of global context is essentially instead of expanding the moral circle to say, we care about us, we care about our village, our town, our country, other people around the world, and we care about animals. The moral circle is a term that was coined many years ago, is expanding. Actually, what we're seeing is the moral circle shrinking. So some people are in such distress right now, and some governments are having such hardship right now with their economies, politically. The moral circle is actually shrinking away from other people with international aid funding shrinking. And so that is an environment where it's very, very difficult to make our points, to make animal rights points in the current environment. And so I really want to talk about that and really want to talk about the fact that if you're feeling that, if you're feeling like your work is harder or that engaging people in the street is harder because I was in a protest the other day and every single person was like, is this what you want to talk about right now? Like, is this the most urgent thing? I've been an activist since 2001, so people have always said that. But right now it feels more acute. It feels more topical to think about kind of wars around the world and other issues that are really affecting humans. And so one of the things that we want to talk about is that, but also the fact that it's sort of these things come and go. And so thinking about, later we'll talk about opportunities where if this is the period we're in, what do we do in this period? So when we're not in this period, we can be ready for the next thing. The next big challenge that we talked to a lot of people about is burnout. And Melanie, I'm going to throw it to you. You've done a lot of writing. You have a whole course on burnout. Tell us about 2 or 3 things that people should watch out for and how to deal with that.
Yeah, Hello, hello? Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, and I can completely relate, just outside of my work in advocacy, and I'm sure a lot of you guys here can relate too. It's like you just look at the news in the morning, and it's like, oh my God, what are we dealing with? And I have that feeling very much too, that the people I talk to outside the movement are already feeling some semblance of burnout. And then, when you look at those of us who are like well aware of the fact that we live in the midst of what can only be called a global atrocity, carnism, speciesism, the suffering, that's happening every second of every day. And we feel this sense of urgency and this deep, deep desire to help end that suffering. That in and of itself can also cause us to move toward burnout. Now, there are a lot of causes of burnout. And I'm going to just talk about two of them here that I think are some of the key causes. First of all, as I said, it takes a tremendous amount of psychological and emotional energy to just cope with the fact that we live in a dominant animal-eating world, right? We all know that, horrible, horrible things are happening every day. And, the people around us are directly participating in that and looking at us like something's wrong with us because we care about it. So we have to go through a lot of psychological gymnastics just to cope with day-to-day life. One key thing that can end up happening to us is that many of us can end up becoming traumatized from this awareness, and particularly from seeing some of the graphic imagery that we've seen. And we develop a form of, it's not, some psychologists refer to this as STSD, secondary traumatic stress disorder, which is just like PTSD, exactly the same, except that it affects the witnesses to violence rather than the direct victims of violence. And there are very high rates of traumatization in the movement, and a lot of us don't even realize that we've been traumatized. And what happens is that this trauma affects us in a number of ways. And one key way is that it creates a mindset, I call this traumatic thinking, where we start to look at the world as though it's one giant traumatic event with only 3 roles to be played. So if you think about like a trauma, you can either be a victim, right? And if you're not a victim, you're a perpetrator. And if you're not a victim or a perpetrator, you can be a hero. And some people say a witness, but a witness can actually be a witness perpetrator if they don't help, or a witness victim if they're, traumatized by the violence. And so we start to develop this mindset where we lose the capacity for nuance, and we place everyone, including ourselves, into one of these roles with rigid boundaries between them. And this way of thinking leads to a sort of a toxic moral perfectionism, where we start to think that if we're not good, 100% good 100% of the time, we're no longer heroes, and we're not victims, we're not hanging in slaughterhouses, for example, then we're perpetrators. And I'm sure how many of you can relate to this thinking, or you've seen this yourselves. It's very, very common in our movement, right? We can hold ourselves and others to impossible standards. So one bad choice, one bad comment, one selfish action, and suddenly you're no longer a hero, so you must be a perpetrator. So this can create a lot of problems for us. And another problem that results from experiencing trauma is what psychologists refer to as survivor guilt. And survivor guilt is an irrational but understandable guilt that we feel when we've experienced, or in this case, witnessed a trauma and have survived when others have not. And so many of us in this movement start to feel very guilty just for feeling good. Just how many of you can relate to this? Feel guilty for not suffering? So you can be going about your day and actually notice that you're enjoying yourself, and then feeling like, I don't have a right to feel this way because I'm not suffering terribly. And so this sense of survivor guilt coupled with traumatic thinking, can lead us to overworking. It can lead us to feeling compelled to use every moment of our time to work for the cause. And don't get me wrong, the cause needs us to be working as hard as we can. It also needs us to be sustainable and to take really good care of ourselves. It needs us to be resilient. And so this is the second point, or the second key cause of burnout is not taking care of our needs. Many of us in this movement are very other focused, and we tend to be focusing so much on helping, and this is a beautiful thing, and it's very understandable, but we end up in the process neglecting our own needs. So one of or two of the most important things that we can do is to, number one, stop witnessing. If you don't absolutely have to, do not look at those graphic images. Give yourself permission to stop. Do not let other people make you a witness. If you don't need to see this stuff, don't look at it. And say to somebody, if they're coming up to you, they're telling you some terrible story, yep, I can't take that in. So don't witness and don't allow other people to make you an unintentional witness, and commit to taking care of your needs. Meaning, give yourself permission to do whatever you need to do to keep yourself internally feeling balanced and healthy and connected. Practice the compassion toward yourself that you're asking others to practice in the world, and this will be one of the most effective things you can do for the cause and yourself in the process.
Thank you. We're going to move on to some wins, because we've started with the heavy stuff. So if you're feeling a bit heavy in this moment in time, we wanted to give you some wins. And so asking people what's their win. The first win I heard a lot is Denmark with an exclamation mark. Raise your hand if you know what's going on in Denmark. One, okay, a few people. Keep your hand up if you're involved in what's going on in Denmark. No one.
Something's rotten in Denmark.
Just, I always feel very conscious when I'm talking about other people's work. So in Denmark, there's been phenomenal success. The government of Denmark is spending around $100 million on helping the population move towards a plant-based diet. So if you can imagine a world where the government is spending about half of the budget of the entire global animal rights movement yearly on transitioning to a plant-based diet. So they're supporting farmers, they're supporting manufacturers, and they're supporting communities, supermarkets, etc. That's really, really, really exciting. We obviously want that to go well. So a lot of people are really looking at that to make sure that that goes the way we want, and that other countries can, in a few years' time, can look at that model and see, okay, how did that go? Did that go well? Was that successful? They are, of course, doing that mostly because they are looking to reduce carbon, and they are looking to improve the health of their population. And we're looking at how some of the backlash from farmers, from individuals is going, and how they're going to transition through that. And so engaging with farmers is really, really important, engaging with all of the barriers to that transition once they've had that, a huge amount of success. So that's a really big win that I keep hearing about with excited tone. So just wanted to talk about that. The second wins I hear a lot is animal law. Raise your hand if you're in animal law. I know there's a session later today about this. Edie, where are you? Some great wins on animal law in the UK. So Animal Law Foundation and Humane League took the government to court, and the legal decisions there was really, really exciting in the sense that the judge said, if an animal suffers because of its genetics, because of its genes, that is illegal in the UK. And now we're one step away from basically showing that genetically modified chickens who suffer because their bodies grow too fast, what we call Franken chickens sometimes, might be outlawed very, very soon. And so through one action of taking the government to court, potentially changing the whole system of how chickens are raised in the UK, and as a precedent, hopefully, in the rest of the world. So really exciting stuff there. There is a session later today. Please go to that if you're interested. The other two wins I wanted to talk about is the alignment of our work with other causes. So for example, health and economic instability. So I mentioned earlier, people are very conscious. There's a cost of living crisis. People are very conscious about what they can afford and what their population can afford. One of the big wins for me is the work of the Middle Eastern Vegan Society. Anyone here from the Middle Eastern Vegan Society? Someone there, maybe? Half a hand raised. One of the huge wins there is that they've convinced a whole hospital in Lebanon to go vegan. The whole, for the period of it. Not for a week, not for a month. It just is what it is. And when I asked them, how did you do this? Lebanon is in an incredible economic crisis right now. There's hyperinflation, no one can afford anything. And they said, well, that's how, because they don't have the budget. They're really trying to figure out how they're going to make the finances work. And so showing them that going vegan is, they can sell it as a health benefit because it is, they can sell it as a carbon benefit because it is, but it's actually also cheaper for them. And so really thinking about the incentives of your audience, really thinking about if there are challenges out in the world, what can we do to show that the solutions that we're advocating for align with the solutions that they're trying to find. In this case, cost reduction. So really, really smart work, really fantastic work to see in a part of the world that is not usually a kind of front runner for vegan initiatives. So really fantastic. And I'm working right now with plant-based health professionals, and they have really interesting initiatives to work with medical professionals, again, engage hospitals, etc. So really fantastic work. Anyone here from plant-based health professionals? Or working with plant-based health professionals? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, but they do good stuff. Go look them up. And the last one for me that I wanted to touch on is just the kind of professionalization of the movement. Starting as an activist in 2001, we didn't have VARC. We didn't have different bodies working together. We didn't have whole suppliers and ecosystem in the movement. We now have whole organizations that just do research. They just do data analysis. They just do parts of the supply chain that we need. They just do engagement with farmers. They just do engagement with climate financing. We are much better placed right now. And so the environment is very, very difficult. It needs a long-term head. It needs a long-term vision to see how we're going to get to where we want after some of what's going on in the world right now. But we are in a really, really good place right now to think about that together and collaborate together. And sorry, I'm looking at my notes. We did a lot of prep for this session. To make all of that happen, I know, Melanie, you've talked a lot about relational literacy and how it impacts basically every intervention and everything we do together. Can you talk about relational literacy a little bit to make sure we get all of those wins done?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say, it's like, I'm listening to you, I'm so inspired. It's so exciting. And, this is the tip of the iceberg in that you were sharing, because we have such limited time, you were sharing, we were cutting back the examples you had, and we could have had pages and pages of these. And I'm so glad that you've shared this, because it's so easy for those of us who are really steeped in this work. And, the mainstream media is not advertising what's going on in the world and what's happening for animals. And it's so important to be reminded of the growth of the movement, and the strength and all of these wins. So thank you so much for that. And so, yeah, we were talking about how important it is to build relational literacy, because relational literacy basically helps, it improves the impact of all of these other interventions, and it improves our lives as well, and our ability to withstand burnout and manage burnout. So relational literacy is the understanding of and ability to practice healthy ways of relating, right? If you think about some of the most pressing problems in the world today, from, war, poverty, racism, patriarchy, animal exploitation, climate change, and so on, you can see that all of these problems, and problems in our personal lives as well, share a common denominator. And this is relational dysfunction, or dysfunctional ways of relating. Whether we're relating as social groups, relating to other individuals, relating to animals, relating to the environment, or even relating to ourselves. We're always relating to ourselves, right? Through our self-talk and through the choices we make that impact our future selves. And so when we build relational literacy, right, we are able to help offset these problems in various ways. If you look at, for example, and we'll talk about this in a little while, like infighting in our groups, problems within our groups and organizations, these are problems that are due to people not having enough relational skills or knowing how to use their relational and communication skills. Relational literacy is fundamental to building effective advocacy, helping us communicate effectively, helping us work together as teams, and helping to reduce the likelihood that we're gonna burn out. Because there have been many, many studies that have shown that people in fulfilling connected relationships they fare better in every aspect of life, right? They live longer, they're healthier in various ways, reduced risk of mental health issues and so on and so forth. And it's critical to managing and preventing burnout. So many vegans have told me over the years that making the choice to become vegan was like one of the most empowering choices that they've made in their lives. And yet this sense of like empowerment and inspiration quickly turns to shock and horror when they realize that their relationships and communication are breaking down. How many of you can relate to this? Yeah, just like 1,000%. So, sorry, that was very American, exaggerating. So, you know, and it's very painful, and like maybe you can relate to this as well. Many vegans in relationships with non-vegans in your lives will start to like push and feel like, okay, well the answer is to just get everybody around me to go vegan, because if everyone were vegan, we'd all be fine. And how does that work for you? So there's this kind of like this pushing, and then it creates more defensiveness, and you know, power struggles grow and grow and grow. And so many people in this movement end up feeling exhausted and frustrated and burning out just because it's so hard to navigate their interpersonal relationships. And now it's really important to recognize that underneath this difference between veganism and carnism in our relationships is a relationship between people. The differences are rarely the problem. It's how we relate to the differences that are the problem. And what really most of us vegans need in our relationships is not necessarily for the other person to go vegan, but to be able to reestablish that sense of connection. It's very, very painful to suddenly feel or to feel disconnected from the people in your life that you care about. And it's very hard to feel connected with people whose behaviors are counter to your values. Right? So one thing you can do is to really give yourself, allow yourself to recognize that good people can participate in harmful practices, and this doesn't make them bad people, right? Give yourself permission to love non-vegans, essentially. And really, as well, recognize that like the pain of disconnection comes from not only feeling like it's hard to respect somebody whose values are different. You know, people don't go vegan for any number of reasons. It's also hard to feel connected to people who you feel don't really see you for who you really are. You don't feel witnessed. And so many vegans have said this to me. They feel unwitnessed in some of their closest relationships. Like, you don't know what matters to me. You don't know what's happening inside of me. You don't know why this offends me so much. So I always recommend asking the people in your life not to go vegan, but to learn about veganism so that they can understand you. And this can be really, really helpful. Invite them to be allies in the movement or in your life, and this can change everything.
Thank you. We're getting the 5 minutes to the Q&A sign, so I'm going to move us to the last section. Our last section here is, what are the biggest opportunities in the next 5-10 years? And again, this comes from a few folks that I spoke to, but also some of my observation working with other movements as well. So the biggest one for me is the intersection between animal protection, animal rights and welfare, and other movements. And there's a huge opportunity there. And similar to what Melanie said in terms of finding ways to connect with people who maybe their values are not your own, but your goals are aligned. I think this is really, really important in how we learn to better interact with other folks. So climate action, climate financing in particular. Activists love activism and love talking to people. If you're thinking about what you can do to be more impactful and you're looking for your next move, go into climate finance if that's your thing. Huge amount is happening there. You can see governments are directing hundreds of millions, probably hundreds of billions globally into climate transitions. Areas where, you know, Denmark, Germany, other governments are really investing a huge amount of money. Even a fraction of that money, if it's aligned with the goals that we have, could be really impactful. So some interventions that we're seeing are elements like farm transitions to reduce carbon, but also transitioning farms to be plant-based farming. All of these kinds of things are really value aligned and goal aligned, and even though the goal of carbon reduction or methane reduction is different, we should be working together. Another thing is energy transition. So again, trillions are going to energy transition. most activists, most people working in kind of plant-based or vegan advocacy have no visibility over this kind of thing. But a huge amount of money is going from energy transition to try and transition to green energy. Essentially, a lot of that money is going to animal agriculture, because animal agriculture essentially creates biogas. And so what we need to understand, and we need to map that, and we need to make sure that anything to do with animals is not factored as green energy if it's made as an outcome of a farm. And so things like that, mapping that and really interacting with that can be very impactful. Otherwise, we are essentially not preventing the expansion of animal agriculture. A couple more things here, but I'm going to wrap up because I want to move to Q&A. Really understanding how bigger systems work, how norms work, and where we can really tap the next 5-10 years. So for example, we know meat consumption is going down in some more developing economies, but it is going up in other developing economies like India, like China, where meat is something you do when you have more money. And so as people have more money, they start eating more meat. That's something that a lot of people are looking at, and that's something that if we could change the norms, where we said, okay, this is how the UK developed, the US developed, but actually it makes people sick and it's terrible for the planet and it's unsustainable, terrible for the environment. Where can developing economies really position themselves to say, we're going to do it better, not the same trajectory as some other development trajectories. So I'm going to wrap up with asking you, Melanie, what gives you hope? And then we're going to throw it to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much. So many things give me hope, but I'm going to keep this quick and share what gives me the most hope of anything, which is you. Just coming to conferences like this and seeing and going around the world and just seeing the incredible work that's being done and the incredible level of commitment of the people in this movement is so deeply inspiring to me, and it recharges my batteries like pretty much nothing else. And it's so important to remember that we are all pioneers. This movement is young. It is still a young movement, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage and commitment to get up every day and be willing to live and speak your truth in the face of, often overwhelming pressure to just stay silent. And, because of you, future generations of vegans aren't going to have to live with this kind of stuff. You're creating a better world, not only for animals and the animals who will never be able to thank us, but also for future vegans. So yeah, I want to just wrap up and say, thank you for the great information you shared, and thank all of you for who you are and all that you do. It's deeply, deeply inspiring to me. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Hello. Yes, we do have a few questions. So thank you to everyone who has submitted. There's still time if not. Okay, so first question. Do you have any advice for instilling a sense of hope and optimism in newer advocates for those tackling more challenging issues where there is almost no understanding of the issue?
What was the second? So those more challenging what?
Tackling more challenging issues where there is almost no understanding of the issue.
Maybe I'll have a different take on that answer. How do you find hope and resilience in a climate that things are really hard right now, like the beginning of this talk? The world is in a crisis right now and on different points. And my answer is, life is long. We have everyone in every movement is feeling this right now. Is feeling really challenged, really blocked, really overwhelmed, I guess. And that is normal. That is human. It's fine to feel it. Feel your feelings and deal with that. Don't ignore it. Don't avoid thinking about it, because it is the world we live in. The world is really overwhelming right now because of the news. But it's movements are long, life is long. The moment we're in right now is not forever. We're seeing slide backs on progress in almost every social movement. In like child development, for example, there's some backsliding because of COVID, because of global financing. People are very demoralized by it. But basically, if you think about it like the stock market, it's kind of things have been improving, and then in the last couple of years, things are dipping, but the dip is still relatively small by comparison to the overall trajectory. And so if you zoom out 20 years, 50 years, what was the situation 50 years ago? What's the situation going to be in 50 years' time? If in the next 2 or 3 years, the public is not going to be open to a particular message, the government's not going to be open to a particular message, what can we do now to prepare? What can we do now for, watching where the narrative is going to go in a few years' time? And until then, what are the things that will make a difference for some people? And some people, they feel almost burnt out and they're trying to find the next step, and maybe it's going to study or going to work in a different industry or different sector to learn from that, to bring those skills back into the sector. That's certainly what I did. So a few of those things are just top of mind.
Yeah, I think that's so important to remember, to not be myopic and just always try to remember the bigger picture. And I would add to that, to quote or paraphrase Sam Harris, the most important, the only thing we can really offer to others and ourselves and the world is our mind. The most important thing we can do is to commit to having to the state of our mind. Essentially, the world will always be going up and down. Problems will always be arising in our personal lives and in the broader world. And if we can commit to building an internal world, where we're fully committed to keeping our nervous systems balanced and in regulation, and committed to having a state of mind where we're not pulled by these stormy seas of changing circumstances, we'll be able to weather and withstand, with a certain degree of equanimity anyway, what life throws us. And to that, this is why the practice of mindfulness is so fundamentally essential, because it's about creating an operating system in your mind that enables you to move through the world regardless of what the world throws at you, in a way that has some semblance of equanimity. And I highly recommend the app Waking Up. It's Sam Harris's app, and it talks all about how to build these skills.
Sorry. Thank you. Next question. Melanie, you mentioned about not looking at depressing images as a means of self-protection. Do you feel the same self-protection should be afforded to those paying for animal products? Should they be forced to see what they are paying for? Or on an empathetic level for humans, should we respect their wish to opt out of seeing the cruelty their money pays for?
That's a great question. So we need to make the invisible visible. There's no question. We need to get people to be aware of what is happening to the animals. How we do that matters very much. If we shock people with graphic imagery, we are inflicting emotional violence on them, essentially. And the reaction to that for people is often to perceive us as perpetrators, right? I mean, people can get angry at us for showing them this information, rather than angry at the industry that's actually causing the person in the first place. And it's just not appropriate. We don't know what somebody's trauma history is or how they're gonna react to this. I mean, I have images in my mind I will never be able to unsee because people put them in front of me without my consent. So I recommend always asking for consent and getting consent. And you can get it. I mean, many people will. You can put a trigger warning on a video and you can word it strategically and let people know why you feel that it's important for them to view this imagery, and then ask them if they will. And we don't need to show a lot. I mean, it doesn't take much. So often we kind of hit people over the head with hey, watch Earthlings. That's a big ask, and not a necessary ask most of the time. It just takes a little bit. So ask consent and prepare people. And once people have given you consent, they've given you buy-in, basically. They have agreed, and they're a lot more receptive to what you share with them.
Lizi, did you have anything, or shall I move on to another question?
Sorry, say that again.
Just wondering if you wanted to add anything, or I can move on to another question.
I think Melanie covered it tremendously well, but I think the question included the word forced. Should we force people to watch this? And I'm just thinking, when did you ever get your way by forcing someone to do anything, right? The word forced is actually really meaningful there. Consent and actually going along with values are aligned, goals are aligned. How do we get to the same place as opposed to starting from opposite side of of an argument before you've even started. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. I'm 9 and I've asked my school to offer more vegan options, but my teacher doesn't understand why this is important to me and says it would be unfair to the other students. What should I say to my school?
Firstly, bless you. I love this question. Yes. I don't know what this person has already shared with their class, but I'm sure there's information on health, information on benefits, information on kind of students cooking together and how it nurtures a better environment and more engagement with food, all of these kinds of things. So there's a lot of stories, a lot of data, a lot of case studies always showing someone's already done it and it worked really well. Anytime you're trying to paint a picture of the future, it's quite hard for a lot of people to get to buy into something that doesn't exist yet. And so from a communication strategy perspective, pointing at something that someone has done and it already exists and it works really well is much easier for people to understand. And so if you are 9, speak to friends and family and maybe even speak to your friends and other parents. So, I mean, in a perfect world, you would get your friends to say, yes, we want this, and you would get their parents to say, yes, we're open to it. And you do a petition with all of the parents saying, we're really interested in this as an option for the class, and you're kind of bringing everyone along, not doing it instead of what people want, but as what everybody wants as transition.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. And I'll just add one little thing, which is the Institute for Humane Education, IHE, is doing great work at communicating, training teachers basically about how to understand and communicate about these issues. So that could also be a great resource.
We have time for one last question. How do we balance urgency and long-term plans now that there is a hard deadline in the form of climate collapse that previous movements didn't face?
So repeat the end of that question again.
How do we balance urgency and long-term plans now that there is a hard deadline in the form of climate collapse that previous movements didn't face?
So that's a really hard question. It's a climate question. So it's slightly broader than I think the expertise on the panel. The interesting thing is, in terms of climate communication, so as part of my sort of neuroscience background, I've done some things around risk communication, and a lot of that is in climate because a lot of people are investing a lot of time and money into studying what would make people take action on climate. The main thing there is that the more urgent and the more intense you make the message, often backfires. So people get resistant to the amount of intensity, the amount of risk. So the riskier you make the communication, the more resistance you're going to get. So actually, in terms of the individuals are overwhelmed, the individuals don't have the ability to engage with those messages right now. And therefore, it's more about governments, and it's more about making sure that the short-term decisions that we're making right now, which are more around climate, cost of living and the economy and everything else like that, are not shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of the longer-term picture. And so really thinking, again, my answer is going to be, what do people care about? And how does this message, and if the message is climate, how does it line up with what they already care about and what they're already trying to achieve? That's me, because I have no time.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, and the urgency, when we're talking about animal rights is also very, very pressing every second of every day. Many individuals are being slaughtered and otherwise exploited. So I would say all of the same approaches for effective advocacy apply. Oh, thank you. Okay, it's like when you order an Uber, the minutes go up and then they go down. So we have 2 minutes. I can speak to that.
Excellent.
I love it.
Sorry, we're out of time, but I know that you guys had a final few words that you wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. I love it. So we have a course at SIVA, the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, and it's called The Science of Effective Vegan Advocacy, and it's about methods and approaches that have empirical support, and we know that they work. And I would say all of these approaches apply regardless as to how urgent a message is, or what kind of a timeline we, perceive ourselves to have. So yeah, that's it. We can wrap up. Do we have anything else? Oh, we do have some other things.
That's it from us, but we have other sessions. So Melanie, you're doing a session today in about 15 minutes time on infighting.
Thank you for remembering that. In 15 minutes, I'm giving a 4-hour workshop on how to prevent and manage infighting in the movement upstairs on the 4th floor in the Park Avenue?
In Park Avenue. And I have been to Melanie's 4-hour workshops. They do not feel like 4 hours, I will say. They feel tremendously fast and tremendously engaging. So highly recommend that. You also have a new book coming out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, thank you for remembering that too. So yes, I have a new book coming out. It is my first fiction book, and it's basically the novelization of the work that I've been doing. So if you want an entertaining way to read about these issues, or basically if there are people in your life who are not necessarily open to, okay, got it, some of these issues, but might be open to reading a psychological thriller with speculative elements. The book is A Half-Hearted Death Wish, and it'll be out for pre-order at the end of April, and you can get more information at melaniejoy.org.
Amazing. And I'm running a session tomorrow for leaders, people managing teams or volunteers, tomorrow afternoon. So if you're interested in coaching, problem solving, how to help people see the options, come to that. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much.